everyone, and welcome to another episode of Wannabe String Music Major. I'd like to apologize for the length of time it took to make and come out with this episode in particular. It took a lot of careful planning to gather all the appropriate information and to make sure everything was absolutely correct, because today's episode is on injuries, a very special and sensitive topic to most musicians. This episode is going to be split into two parts because of the amount of information. Right now, you are watching part 1. We'll be discussing the most common types of injuries among violin, viola, cello, bass, guitar, and harp. Plus, we'll feature some easy steps to follow should you come across potential injury. Alright, let's do this! Instrumental injuries are considered to be one of the scariest obstacles a musician has to overcome, even for top-notch professional players. Some simply harm your progress, while others can be painful and debilitating. In the professional world, an injury can be considered fatal to your career. You could be spending hours practicing, which means that your injury could impede in that practice, and that your injury would have been abused for all of those hours. And once that injury becomes serious and starts to impede on your playing, then it won't be long before another musician comes along and takes your chair. You see what I mean by scary? Before you get intimidated, however, let me make a general statement. Almost all injuries can be prevented and fixed with a few easy steps. Some injuries take years to develop before they permanently injure, but most can be fixed within a few minutes, depending on how wisely you practice. There are two basic signs that can help determine whether you may be developing an injury or not. If you find you're not making progress on your instrument because of a position you're in, and if a certain position causes you pain. Most of the time, the injury in question can be caused by both reasons at the same time. After all, most injuries are caused by incorrect positioning of the arms, wrists, fingers, posture, and instrument. All in all, there are only 4 steps that you need to take to solve most injuries.
Well, undoubtedly, it sounds like the most obvious step in the world. If it's impeding your progress of your instrument, of course you'd want to stop. And if you're in pain, then you have no choice but to stop, don't you? However, you would be surprised how crucial this step is and how often musicians skip it. It is pretty hard to believe naturally, but sometimes circumstances sneak up on musicians. In fact, if this happens to you, you probably find yourself in the same situation. Here's why musicians can't or won't stop if they discover an injury.
They're in the middle of playing something. It is pretty bad timing to discover an injury in the middle of a rehearsal, or, even worse, an actual performance. So, in these cases, they have no choice but to keep playing, whether you have that injury or not. This has potential to happen in the practice room too. You could be in the middle of playing a piece and may not want to stop, even if your fingers are becoming overworked or if you happen to have an incorrect position. They may not think the injury is a big deal, or even notice the injury to begin with. Unfortunately, even a slightly incorrect position can be a big deal when it comes to your playing. The littlest things can dramatically change your sound. A good example of this is your bow hold and a weak pinky. Listen to how the sound changes when the pinky is flat. And when the pinky is bent. Another important thing to remember about small injuries, if they are small at first but develop into larger injuries, or if the injury causes you to skip out on needed practice time, then it could easily become a big deal later on. They are afraid to speak up and say something about it, in case it could be detrimental to their career. After all, what musician likes being told that they can't play their music after all? However, if you discover a bad position or potential injury, then that is more like a warning sign that something needs to change before you can continue your practice and performing. They may believe that they will have to relearn their instrument all over again and have wasted time playing the way they've played up until now. Keep in mind, however, that this is a very rare case. Most injuries or bad positions can be thought of as bad habits, and it is possible to rehabilitate yourself if you remain consistent and persistent in your practice. Even if you have a lot of bad positions, try to fix one position at a time rather than all at once, and see where that takes you in your practicing.
As it turns out, stopping is a very important step. You'll need to give yourself time in your practice to fix your position, so you must pause for a moment, perhaps for a few minutes even, before you move on to the next step.
You'll need a few minutes for this step, figuring out what exactly the issue is. Here are some things you can ask yourself once you've indicated that you're using a bad position, or if you find it hurts to play your instrument. Is there anything wrong with your overall stance? Are your feet properly balanced on the ground so that you are rooted and not making any strange movements while playing? Are your feet or legs crossed? Are you tensing up any specific muscles in your core while playing? Are you only having a particular problem when you are sitting down or standing up? Do you make any odd movements with your body to try and express yourself that may be causing a strain on you and or your instrument? Are you standing or sitting up straight and breathing properly? Is there anything wrong with the environment around you? Are you practicing in a space that is stressful to you? Are you comfortable with your surroundings, including the air and lighting? Are you in a mood that is suitable for efficient practice? Are you well nourished and well rested? Have you been practicing for a long amount of time that you may not be accustomed to? Are you at your healthiest and have prepared your body for optimal playing? Is there anything wrong with how the instrument is placed on you or around you? Do you have your shoulder rest in a strange position, and does it need to be adjusted? Do you have your end pin out too far or too close to you? Do you feel comfortable with your instrument placed on you or around you? Or do you feel as if it's going to slip at any moment? Is the instrument itself not an appropriate size for your build? Is there anything wrong with the equipment for your instrument? Does your shoulder rest slip often into uncomfortable positions? Is your chin rest too high or too low for your neck? Does your end pin slip and cause you to shrink down with your instrument? Is your end pin at a height that causes you to adjust yourself frequently? Is your footstool at a height that feels unnatural to you? If you're sitting down, are you sitting at a strange angle that makes you feel like you have to twist your body strangely? Is your music stand too high or too low? Is your foot stand too high or too low, or in a strange position on the floor? Is your chair uncomfortable? Is there any part of your practicing or playing that you have recently changed? Has your playing time increased from 1 to 2 hours to 7 to 8 hours a day? Has your practice time suddenly become more vigorous? Are you practicing with a different instrument, particularly one that is smaller or larger in size, or may have a difference of height on the bridge or even between the strings and the fingerboard? Is there anything wrong with your feet or knees? Do you have to move your feet constantly while playing? Are you used to walking and playing at the same time? Do you have to grind your feet into the floor when you play? Do you feel like you're always off balance because of your foot position? Do you use your toes or the balls of your feet to keep balanced or hit a pedal? Is there anything wrong with your shoulders? Do you have to raise them or lower them in order to fit themselves around your instrument? Do the muscles in your shoulders feel disconnected with the rest of your body? Do they feel sore after playing for only a short amount of time? Do you feel like your arms are being dragged down by your shoulders? Is there anything wrong with your wrists? Do you have to twist them strangely in order to place your fingers on the instrument better? Does your left wrist rest itself against the neck of your instrument without your knowledge? Do you commonly tighten your wrist when you play? Does your wrist use vibrato correctly? Is there anything wrong with your fingers? Do your fingers tend to lock into place or attach themselves to your instrument? Do you feel the need to tightly grip your instrument rather than place your fingers down? Do your fingers bend themselves in strange positions as you shift on your instrument without your knowledge? Are your fingernails too long? Is there anything wrong with your neck? Do you have to strain your neck to fit yourself around the instrument and read the music comfortably? Does the instrument stick out of your neck in front of you or to your side? Does your neck tense up every time you get to a difficult musical passage or you get nervous? Are you in the habit of cracking your neck often? Do you lean your neck to the side to play and stretch out a muscle without knowing? Does your neck tend to stick out and want to look downwards? All of these questions can help identify almost all potential problems and injuries you may have. If you're still not able to locate an injury, try asking a teacher or a trusted friend, or video record yourself and examine how you play and how you react to the music. If any position you use looks unnatural, then there's a good chance it probably is not a correct position. Once you identify the problem you're having, take a few minutes and set up a plan to help solve your problem. Since most injuries are caused by bad habits or strange technique, it's crucial to set up a goal for yourself and form steps to help solve any issue you may have. Say, for example, you're having a problem kind of like the one that I've been having recently where I need to fix my left hand. I have found that my fingers do not really remain curved. Plus my hand tends to get lazy and collapse, which makes my fingers flat. I also have a problem where instead of playing on the tips of my fingers, I place my fingers flatly on the fingerboard. Plus my overall intonation needs work. Wow, that sounds like a lot of problems, doesn't it? As musicians, it's super easy to lose confidence because of all the issues we have with our playing and our need to fix them immediately. However, if these issues all sound very similar, you can easily organize them into a more comprehensible goal. So, I have a lazy hand, flat fingers, bad intonation, and I need to play more on the tips of my fingers. All of these problems can be solved just from learning to keep my fingers curved. As long as I stand my fingers up, I can keep my hand from going lazy while learning to play on the tips of my fingers, which will help fix my overall intonation. All of these issues solved just by fixing one simple problem. Here's a plan that I have set up for myself to help solve my flat finger problem. At the start of my practice session, I take a moment to myself to isolate the area I am working on to make sure that I set up everything correctly. I start at my fingers and work my way down my arm, making sure that I have a relaxed position. After that, I try out the new position with a simple song or small portion of a scale. You don't want to automatically try this out on a full-scale, etude, or on our technically demanding piece just yet. You need all of your concentration on making sure you can work with the new position and keep it set up correctly. Once you got a decent handle of your new position, you can try it out on our scale or etude. Make sure that as you shift yourself back to your regular work, that you keep an eye on your new position. This way, you can catch yourself in case you start getting lazy or stop paying attention to it. Of course, it's important to pay attention to your routine, but you don't have to worry if it's really tricky to do so at first. As long as you try to stick to your routine, then you just let time do the rest of the work. It could take from a week to most likely a month for you to get into a new habit. You will most likely start to feel changes in your sound the first few days of practicing, and then it'll just feel natural after a while. It just takes some time for your fingers to get used to everything, so you need to give it that time, and don't be discouraged if it doesn't work at first. Okay, duh. This is another really obvious step, but unfortunately, it's also a very important step that a lot of musicians skip or may quit halfway through. It does take a bit of acceptance and humbleness to admit to yourself that you have a technical problem that needs to be fixed. It also takes self-awareness and understanding to locate the problem, some motivation and a good plan to figure out how to fix it, and a lot of willpower to fix the problem and keep up at fixing it. Some days, for musicians, that's not a problem at all. But other days, when you're not feeling motivated or focused, it could be a lot of work. It's a very hard thing to do, trying to fix a problem you have, and it's super easy to slip up, mentally give up, and revert back to your old playing. And voila! If you follow these steps, then in a few weeks, you'll be able to fix any bad habits and prevent any injuries.
First of all, it's important to understand that we are built uniquely, and we all have differently shaped hands and joints. One technique for one string player may not work for another string player. Some of us may even be double jointed, particularly in the fingers. In any case, special cases like these make it more difficult to learn and fix techniques. If you have a specific problem with a joint or a deformation, talk to your teacher about it and see if the both of you can come up with a solution. Most students that have unusual joints or fingers are able to find a way around their problem, or even use it to help them improve on their instruments. If you are also worried about injuries, you may benefit from talking to your doctor as well. They will be able to identify the exact injury or deformity you have and will tell you what to do to help it. Look on violinist.com if you have any questions about double joints. There's a wonderful discussion that will answer some questions you may have. One of the examples the musicians use on the website and in similar discussions is the famous Niccolo Paganini, who was most famous for having incredibly long, skinny fingers thanks to a rare condition known as Marfan syndrome. Marfan syndrome is a genetic disorder that affects a person's connective tissue and is known to cause many physical, life-threatening problems. The most prominent feature of this disorder is unusually tall and skinny limbs and joints. This was actually helpful to Paganini, and his technique was beyond astonishing, as his fingers were super quick and his hand could stretch twice as far as usual. It was rumored that he could hit 12 notes per second. Paganini's audience was convinced the reason his hands were so large and his talent so virtuosic was because he had made a deal with the devil, selling his soul for wonderful skill in the violin.
Here's another thing to think about. What do you do if you are injured by a non-musical object? For this case, I'm going to use a couple of my own examples, my most recent being my rifle injury. Last year, I had participated in the school's marching band, the Spirited Pride of Pennsylvania, and I was a part of the color guard. One day during sectionals, we were working on a rifle routine, and when I had attempted a toss, the rifle came smashing down on my right ring finger. For those of you with medical background, I had staved my finger, and after a few hours, my finger was stiff, completely swollen, and entirely purple. Luckily, I spoke up immediately about it to my friends, and I took ibuprofen to help the pain and swelling, and I kept my finger iced too. Because I acted in the way I had, my finger did not need a cast, and after a week, it was actually back to normal. I actually had to spend 3 hours at an orchestra rehearsal about 2 hours after I had injured myself. Obviously, this was a very scary situation for any string player with an injury. Luckily, this was on my bow hand, so I was able to rest my hand on my bow and not cause any further injury to my finger. Was this incredibly risky? Yes. And if you are injured, you should talk to your director and possibly sit out on rehearsal. The reason why I did not do this was because my finger did not produce any pain from bowing, so I was fine. The way I see it, if you have an injury and playing your instrument does not cause your injury any aggravation of any kind, then you may continue to practice and play and not have to worry. Of course, I absolutely do not recommend you play with an injury. You should check with your doctor first before you continue practice. Another example story for you to think about. The summer before I began officially attending Mansfield University, I had started developing a very odd and very painful sensation in my tendons and near my thumbs. I couldn't quite figure out what was the cause of my pain. All I knew is that the pain was becoming aggravated from me playing the viola right before I was about to start attending school for music. After a visit to the orthopedist, I found out that I had tendinitis in both of my wrists, and I had to wear these wrist braces for a week straight. No viola or any other strenuous activity. Can you even begin to imagine what kind of agony it was for me to want to pick up my instrument and play music, but not being allowed to, or by watching a symphony orchestra play on the 4th of July and wondering if that could have been me, but not anymore after injuring myself. Funny how easily we can take something for granted until the instant you lose it. Ladies and gentlemen, miraculously enough, after my recovery, I had managed to find out what exactly was causing me all of this pain from tendinitis. Believe it or not, it was video games. Not only do I consider myself a passionate musician, I also consider myself a passionate gamer. There's nothing quite like getting wrapped up in a good story and then having to work hard to see yourself to the end. I admit it. Anyway, my exact problem was at the controller, where my thumbs would do a lot of heavy-duty pressing, especially at an intense moment of the game. In this case, my injury was Gamer's thumb, also known as thumb tendonitis, and officially known as de Quervain syndrome. De Quervain syndrome is defined as a repetitive stress injury that can be caused by daily activities done repeatedly and harshly. The symptoms include inflammation, pain, and possible nerve damage if those actions continue after a long period of time without treatment. There are many variations and aliases for de Quervain syndrome. The nickname depends on the cause of the injury. Incidentally, tendonitis is literally an inflammation of a tendon, which is a tough but flexible band of fibrous tissue. The most common tendon that gets injured in the musician world is right on your wrist, around the middle. If you do any sorts of activity, you should see your tendons flex while they work. Make sure that you don't confuse tendonitis with tenosynovitis, which is an inflammation of the synovium, or the fluid-filled sheath that surrounds your tendon. Make sure you also don't confuse tendonitis with tendinosis, which is damage to the tendon at a cellular level. They sound similar, but this is treated differently than tendonitis. So, keep in mind that if you have a potential injury, the cause of it could just as easily be something non-musical. Make sure you keep an eye open at all times if a part of your body hurts frequently, so that you can pinpoint the exact cause of the injury and fix it as soon as possible. Well, folks, that just about does it for part 1 of this episode. Stay tuned in the future for our part 2, which should be coming out next semester. Until then, stay cool and happy practicing!